There are moments in every financial cycle when the most important movements occur without witnesses. No headlines, no breaking news banners, no viral clips explaining what just happened. Only quiet decisions made by people whose job is not to be right, but to make sure nothing stops. This documentary begins in that silence. Not because the subject is secret, but because it is inconvenient. It challenges beliefs that have become comfortable. It disrupts narratives that feel morally satisfying. And it asks a question that most people postpone until it is no longer safe to ask. How does silver actually exit the system when stress begins not in theory, but in reality? Most conversations about silver begin with justification. Why it matters, why it has been undervalued, why it should be owned. Those discussions are familiar, and they serve a purpose. But they are incomplete, because ownership is only the opening chapter of every cycle. What comes next, how assets move when pressure builds, is rarely discussed, not because it is unknowable, but because it requires detachment. It requires separating belief from behavior, conviction from structure. And structure is what matters now, not because of a single event, not because of a price, but because we are entering a phase where the rules governing calm markets no longer apply evenly. When systems are stable, markets appear unified. Prices feel authoritative. Liquidity feels permanent. Everyone assumes they will be able to act when they choose. But stress does not arrive as an announcement. It arrives as prioritization. Supply chains do not collapse. They reroute. Contracts do not fail loudly. They are quietly renegotiated. And markets do not disappear, they fragment. This is the first uncomfortable truth. There is no single silver market under pressure. There are multiple markets operating simultaneously, each with different incentives, access points, and power dynamics. Retail participants rarely see this happening in real time. By the time fragmentation becomes visible, leverage has already shifted. This brings us to the first myth that must be dismantled: the idea that holding silver indefinitely is a strategy. Hold forever sounds disciplined. It sounds resistant. It sounds like strength. But in practice, it confuses endurance with control. No industrial participant operates without defined exit pathways. No serious operator treats accumulation as the end goal. Cycles do not reward permanence. They reward adaptability. The second myth is more seductive: the belief that heightened awareness changes outcomes. That because more people understand silver's role, because the system is visibly strained, because the narrative feels obvious, this cycle will resolve differently. History does not support that belief. Awareness does not neutralize cycles. In many cases, it accelerates their later stages by concentrating conviction. And concentrated conviction is fragile when conditions change. This documentary is not an argument against silver. It is an examination of silver's function inside a modern technological economy where demand is not ideological, but operational. Silver is not admired by corporations. It is required, and requirements behave differently than investments. They are governed by continuity, compliance, and risk management, not sentiment. This is why the most consequential silver transactions rarely appear on price charts. They occur through procurement channels, legal frameworks, and specifications that most investors never encounter. And this is why this topic matters now. Not because something dramatic is about to happen, but because the silent phase, the phase where positioning determines outcomes, is already underway. This film will not offer predictions. It will not provide reassurance. And it will not flatter the audience. Instead, it will do something far more useful. It will show you how cycles transition, how market psychology shifts under constraint, and why exits are not failures but completions. By the end of this documentary, you will understand why those who prepare early appear calm later, why selling intelligently is not disloyal, and why control is never surrendered suddenly. It is surrendered gradually by those who refuse to think beyond accumulation. To understand how silver exits the system under stress, you must first understand how it enters. Most discussions about silver begin with ownership. Coins, bars, vaults, storage. These are tangible, visible, and emotionally grounding. But ownership is only the surface layer of a much larger structure. Beneath it sits a procurement ecosystem that rarely intersects with retail markets until it has to. Industrial silver does not move through coin shops. It moves through contracts, specifications, delivery schedules, and penalties. It is sourced not for appreciation, but for continuity. When supply flows smoothly, this system remains invisible. When it falters, priorities shift rapidly. At the center of this system are procurement managers whose mandate is not to save money, but to prevent failure. Their risk is not paying too much, it is not having enough. Production lines do not pause for price debates. They pause when inputs fail to arrive. This is the first structural reality most investors never encounter. Industrial demand is inelastic under stress. When silver becomes difficult to source in required forms, the question stops being at what price and becomes from whom. This is where market psychology begins to diverge. In the early stage of a cycle, narratives dominate. Education spreads, ownership grows, and belief solidifies. Participants feel aligned against a common external system. Holding becomes identity. As constraints emerge, a second phase begins quietly. Supply chains tighten. Lead times extend. Contracts become harder to fulfill. Refiners and fabricators start prioritizing long-term clients over spot opportunities. None of this appears dramatic. There are no headlines, only subtle friction. This is the phase where professionals begin preparing, not reacting. The third phase is where psychology fractures. Retail participants see rising attention and assume validation. Industrial participants see risk concentration and move to secure redundancy. These perspectives do not conflict, they simply operate on different timelines. Mania, when it arrives, does not announce itself as irrational. It presents as certainty. It is marked by simplified narratives, moral framing, and dismissal of nuance. Anyone discussing exits is accused of betrayal. Anyone discussing structure is labeled fearful. This is where traps form. Those who entered early but never planned exits become emotionally invested in the story, continuing indefinitely. Those who arrive late mistake visibility for safety. And those who quietly prepared begin executing without commentary. Throughout history, this pattern repeats across commodities, not to predict outcomes, but to understand behavior. Tin, copper, rare earths, energy inputs all exhibit the same sequence. Awareness precedes stress. Stress precedes bifurcation. Bifurcation precedes quiet redistribution. Who benefits at each stage depends not on belief, but on positioning. Early accumulators benefit from optionality. They can wait, observe, and choose. Late entrants benefit from momentum, but only briefly. Institutions benefit from access. And those without defined pathways benefit least of all. This brings us to a critical distinction: facts versus narratives. The fact is that silver has dual roles, monetary and industrial. The narrative is that one role will eventually dominate the other. In reality, cycles do not resolve through domination. They resolve through prioritization. When stress increases, silver flows toward uses deemed non-negotiable. This does not require conspiracy. It requires contracts. Retail markets assume liquidity because they're accustomed to it. But liquidity is conditional. It depends on intermediaries who themselves depend on upstream fulfillment. When upstream stress rises, downstream promises are quietly revised. This is why exits are not symmetrical. The path into silver is wide. The path out narrows under pressure, and it narrows unevenly. Warning signs do not appear as alarms. They appear as delays, specification changes, and silence. When refiners stop quoting certain forms. When buyback terms quietly shift. When delivery flexibility disappears. These are not predictions. They are signals that the system is reallocating attention. At this stage, industrial buyers do not panic publicly. They escalate privately. They leverage relationships, certifications, and documentation. They seek reliability, not publicity. And this is where another belief collapses, that all silver is treated equally. It is not. Form matters. Provenance matters. Compliance matters. Industrial buyers are not collectors. They will not adapt their processes to accommodate sentiment. They require silver that fits their systems legally, technically, and logistically. Those who understand this early retain control. Those who learn it late discover that their silver is valuable, but not to the buyers who now matter most. None of this implies betrayal of principle. It implies understanding of cycles. Cycles always redistribute leverage. They reward those who recognize when accumulation gives way to allocation. They punish those who confuse permanence with strength. As tension increases, the market does not explode. It fragments. Parallel pathways emerge. Public pricing becomes less informative. Private negotiations become decisive. This is not chaos. It is reordering. The final stage is not collapse, it is resolution. And resolution always favors those who planned exits when exits were unfashionable. Every cycle ends the same way. Not with agreement, not with closure, but with redistribution. By the time emotions peak and narratives harden, the system has already chosen its winners not based on belief, but on positioning. This documentary was never about telling you what to do. It was about restoring perspective in a space where conviction often replaces analysis. Fear and excitement are opposites, but they share a weakness, both compress time. They make people feel that decisions must be immediate, reactive, and absolute. Discipline does the opposite. It expands time. Discipline allows you to think in phases instead of moments, in frameworks instead of headlines, in rules instead of impulses. And this is why preparation always outperforms prediction. Prediction demands certainty about outcomes. Preparation only demands awareness of structure. Cycles do not require you to guess the future. They require you to recognize when your role within them changes. Accumulation is a role. Holding is a role. Exiting done intelligently is also a role. None of them are moral positions. They are strategic ones. One of the most damaging beliefs in financial communities is the idea that selling represents weakness or betrayal. In reality, selling well is evidence of maturity. It is how capital survives long enough to matter again in the next cycle. Those who confuse loyalty with discipline often discover too late that they were loyal to a phase, not to their own long-term control. What separates professionals from participants is not information. It is detachment. The ability to act without needing validation, applause, or consensus. When stress enters a system, it does not punish everyone equally. It punishes rigidity. It rewards flexibility. And it transfers leverage quietly, long before the crowd realizes the rules have changed. This is why the calmest participants near the end of a cycle are rarely the loudest. They're already executing plans built when certainty was low and attention was elsewhere. Cycles always resolve, not because systems collapse, but because incentives realign. And when they do, the people who feel most shocked are not those who were wrong, but those who never considered that success itself would require an exit. If this documentary has done its job, it has not made you anxious. It has not made you excited. It has made you precise. Precise about how markets behave. Precise about where narratives end and mechanics begin. Precise about the difference between belief and control. Because the goal was never to tell you when to act. The goal was to ensure that when the moment comes, whatever it looks like, you are not surprised by the system you chose to participate in. Cycles do not reward certainty. They reward those who remain clear-headed when certainty is no longer possible.